Dave. I figured for today's video, this is just another thing that's been coming up in conversation with me a lot lately. I would just sort of gather together my rebuttals to a lot of the problems people have with Star Trek Discovery. It's the new Star Trek series, or the current Star Trek series, I guess would be more appropriate because it's already in season 2. Here's the thing, I've been watching Star Trek long as I can remember, right? As much as I used to give some of my science fiction aligned comrades in high school a hard time about Star Trek, Star Trek's always been a part of my life and my family's life. One of my earliest memories is sitting on my great-grandma's floor with her thick brown carpet and watching the animated series. I couldn't even tell you what specific episode, but I very clearly remember Lieutenant Mress, and I remember the animated, the Filmation Enterprise, right? So I've been watching Star Trek pretty much my whole life, okay? And I've been pretty into it, right? So one criticism I notice from a lot of people is the one that's the easiest to dismiss. I'll make it clear from the beginning, like not every critic of Discovery is racist or misogynistic or homophobic. I have to say that because there are enough that are that way that make those criticisms, and then people, anytime you try to rebut those guys, people climb out of the woodwork to say, oh no, I just hate the writing, I think the continuity is bad. That's fine if you want to feel that way, but that's not the specific criticisms that we're addressing. So Sonequa Martin Green, if you haven't seen Discovery, you may remember her from The Walking Dead, which I think she was great on. The character of Sasha kind of got unfairly shit on by people who don't understand things like PTSD. I thought it was a great portrayal. She did great at it. So there are people that have a problem with the lead of the series being a black woman. Now, this may sound dumb to you because we had a black man as our captain, right, in Ben Sisko, and we had a woman as a captain with Captain Janeway. So a big problem here for people is she's the main character, and that's sort of new territory for Star Trek. Star Trek's always been an ensemble show. So while Sisko was one of the most important characters on Deep Space Nine, he wasn't the focus of the show. It wasn't all through his point of view, right? Discovery is starting to move away from that with season 2. It is feeling a little more like an ensemble, but season 1 is very much what's going on with Michael Burnham, right? So it is a little inaccurate to say that she's not the first black or first female lead for Star Trek, because in reality she's the first lead for Star Trek. It's always been an ensemble before. Even in the original series, you had the trinity of Kirk, McCoy, and Spock, right? And Kirk may have been the leader, he may have been at the forefront, but the stories they were telling were equal parts of all of those guys through the lenses of the entire crew or Federation at large. So that's become a big problem. Stamets caused a lot of controversy. Stamets is our astro-mycologist. He studies space mushrooms, taking inspiration from the real-life Paul Stamets, who is a fucking nut job, but he's got some really crazy, out there, and interesting theories about mycelia and mushrooms and the future of humanity, and that's why they used him. He's gay, He's got a wonderful, loving relationship. Again, one of the first in Trek. A lot of people will say, you know, the first gay relationship, but more than that, it's not about it being a gay relationship. It's a meaningful, well thought out, loving, and normal relationship that we get in season 1 of Discovery. And that's really unusual for Star Trek. They don't do a lot of that. So anyway, these the bigoted critiques, I was explaining the rebuttals to those maybe, but we don't have to give them much weight. Another critique I saw a lot, it's one that's unusual for me because it's such a minor thing and it's already been explained. So if you watch the original series, which takes place about a decade after Discovery, you'll notice that occasionally someone on their uniform, they'll have a patch that's different than the what used to be called the Arrowhead, is now usually referred to as the Delta, which is the standard Starfleet insignia, right? That's what we see them wear on the Enterprise, but then we've seen other people wearing other insignia on the show, on the original Star Trek series. So for years there was an assumption that people assumed that all starships had their own insignia, and that was just the insignia of the Enterprise, which was later adopted as a Starfleet insignia. There was a related fan theory that said that Starfleet had its own insignia, but then each Constitution class ship had its own insignia, and those are the different ones that we see. It was actually explained a few years ago when they found a memo to the costume department. What had happened is, if you watch the Omega Glory, we see a couple of people they're from a different ship. They've got, instead of the Starfleet Delta, a long triangle with some spots on it, and it's got it's sort of like a braid interwoven into it, and then they've got the department symbols like the regular Starfleet symbols have. So they're wearing that. The memo to the costume department says, hey, you messed up, right? Everybody is supposed to be wearing the same Arrowhead design on their uniforms, right? And what had happened is, in an earlier episode with Charlie X, Charlie X featured some guys wearing mustard yellow turtlenecks with insignia on their chest. And at the time, it had been intended to show that those were like civilians in a merchant marine type of service. So the whole point of those insignia was to show that those guys weren't Starfleet. The costume designer was familiar with that and assumed that it was because they were on a different ship. So he had come up with some symbols for these guys on a different ship. The memo is addressing that directly, right? And saying, this is what we'll do from now on. But the memo says, you know, you've already done production. Don't waste any money going back and changing things. Just keep this in mind in the future. And if you pay attention to the episode order in which they were filmed, they do. When we get to the Tholian web and everything, we watch the USS Defiant getting trapped, everybody dying on board the Defiant. The Defiant's another Constitution class ship, so it would fall under either one of those two fan theories about the different patches. But all the dead bodies are still wearing the Starfleet Delta, right? And that's continuity, which should be impressive because the original series was not big on keeping continuity. They didn't know they were going to be rerun into the ground. They didn't know people were going to be watching them for hours on end. So they didn't really have to worry about continuity at the time. That all came later. So building the canon was not as strict. But they maintained that through the rest of the series. Watch it and you'll see. The next thing that gets brought up a lot is the design and change in the culture of the Klingons. Now, I have my own fan theory on this, and it's actually really simple. So here's the thing. The Klingons, we know that they've tried genetic manipulation in the past, and we know that it hasn't quite worked out for them. Now, there's no reason in the 100 years since Star Trek Enterprise, between Enterprise and Discovery, there is zero reason why the Klingons wouldn't keep tampering, right? So there's that, first of all. Second, visual continuity. Visual continuity doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what anyone says, right? Things don't have to look the same from one movie to the next, right? If you look at, let's use the Batman movies from the 90s as an example, right? All 4 of those movies take place in the same universe. They're supposed to, right? Visual continuity is all over the place. Is that people's primary concern? That they're using Val Kilmer, who doesn't look anything like Michael Keaton, who doesn't look anything like George Clooney? No, changing the actors is not the problem. Almost nobody complained when Billy D. Williams was replaced with Tommy Lee Jones for that series of movies. It was just accepted. Different directors, different look. We can imagine they're in the same universe, right? That's one point about those Klingons. The other point is, when it comes to the Klingon culture, everything we get about the Klingon culture comes from The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Voyager. The original series had almost no culture for the Klingons. All we knew was that they were in sort of a Cold War with the Federation. They were dickheads, they were mean, but we didn't get things about like their honor or anything about their homeworld, anything like that. So the fact is, over the course of 100 years, things change. And the Klingons that we see in Discovery are responsible for losing a war, which, from what we know about the Klingons, is a pretty big fucking deal to them, right? So imagine you have a class, right, who has lost a war in your honor-bound society that basically only thinks about war, right? Are they going to be the ones leading and dominating the culture after 100 years? Probably not. I can honestly see Discovery very easily phasing out the Klingons that they're currently using and bringing in more of the honor-bound, superstitious, ritualized Klingons from Next Generation and everything. You got to show that transition, provide story continuity, which we still have. I've got a few more things to say about Discovery, so I will be back with another video. We'll just call this one part 1. I want to thank you guys for watching. Go ahead and share this if you're interested, if you like what you saw, and subscribe if you want to see more. Hit that bell notification icon and you'll be sure to get a notification every time I post a new one, which lately has been a lot. So go ahead and keep up. Thank you very much. Goodbye.